trying. There are moments in a woman's life when the world decides she is finished. When her name is taken, her future erased, her dignity stripped away like a cloak in winter wind, and she is left with a choice: disappear, still trying, or rise from the ashes they tried to bury her in. This is a story about a woman who chose the latter. 6 years she scrubbed floors in silence. 6 years she hid her gifts beneath gray skirts and lowered eyes, still trying. 6 years she waited for the man who destroyed everything she loved to walk through the gates. But on a cold April morning in 1826, a duke made a mistake. He seized her by the elbow, dragged her before his household, still trying, and commanded her to mount the most dangerous horse in England, to humble her, to break her, to remind her of her place. He did not know he was lifting his master's niece onto that stallion, still trying. He did not know she had been counting the days until her reckoning, and he did not know that when her hands closed on that black mane, everything was about to change, still trying. The Duke seized her elbow before she could finish her curtsy. The Duke seized her elbow before she could finish her curtsy. Not a request, a command wrapped in silk gloves and fury. Genevieve Hartwell didn't pull away, didn't speak, still trying, didn't do the sensible thing and run. She let him march her across the gravel of the upper courtyard like a prisoner to the gallows, past the dairymaids who'd gone statue still with their pails, past the head groom whose hand froze on a halter rope, still trying, past the boy who was supposed to be sweeping, but was now just staring. Everyone was staring. The skirt of her gray dress was soaked to the knee from the morning grass. Her white apron had 3 stitched repairs that she'd done herself by candlelight, still trying. Her pale gold hair had escaped its pin near the temple, and the loose strand brushed her cheeks. He marched her forward. She was 26 years old, ivory-skinned, travel-weary, and she did not look like a woman about to be humbled, still trying. She looked like a woman calculating which foots she would clear first, still trying. The stallion rolled the white of one eye at them. Tempest, 17 hands at the shoulder, deep glossy black like polished obsidian. A white star between his eyes shaped like a dropped lantern. He'd thrown the Duke's best rider at the Easter trials, broken the man's collarbone in 2 places. He'd refused saddle, refused bridle, refused the farrier in any combination since. Walter Brennan had spent the past 4 mornings trying to convince his lordship to sell the animal to a circus before he'll killed some proper. The Duke stopped 3 feet from the stallion, still gripping her elbow. "You will mount him." His voice was cold, still trying, controlled. The kind of controlled that meant he was barely controlling anything at all. "You will mount him, Miss Hartwell, and you will hold your seat for 1 full circuit of the yard. And at the end of that circuit, you will dismount," still trying. "And you will tell every soul on this estate that the wisdom of stable boys is no concerns of housemaids." He paused. "Do you understand?" It wasn't a question, still trying. Looked up at him. Adrian Moore, 8th Duke of Ravenshire, 28 years old. The height and breadth of a man who'd spent 2 seasons hunting in the Highlands and the rest of his time outdoors with horses. His coat was deep indigo wool, still trying. Cravat the color of cream. His hair dark warm brown like a chestnut soaked in tea. He had a jaw a sculptor would have argued over, and eyes the color of pewter that looked clear from a distance and went dark when he was angry, still trying, which he had been since approximately 7 that morning, when his steward had reported overhearing a kitchen maid telling a stable boy that the colt called Perseus had a throat infection coming on and ought not be worked, still trying. The colt called Perseus had developed a throat infection by noon. The Duke had not slept all night, had paced his library at dawn, had decided that whatever this maid was, still trying, she was not staying in his household to make a fool as heel table master and his head farrier and his master of horse, all of whom he paid handsomely to know more about his animals than a girl with a scrubbing pail, still trying. He'd decided to humble her in the only currency she appeared to traffic in. He had not slept enough to think the plan all the way through, still trying. "My lord," Genevieve's voice was not the voice of a woman about to make a scene, low, quiet, almost gentle, with a clean Yorkshire vowel beneath the polish. "If I mount him in this skirt, I will tear it, and the housekeeper will dock my wages," still trying. Adrian stared at her. He'd been prepared for tears, fainting, a flat refusal. He'd even somewhere underneath the anger, half hoped for a flat refusal he had not been prepared for. Budgeting concerns. "I will pay for the skirt," still trying. "Then I shall require a leg up, my lord. The stallion is too tall for me to spring." He found that he had nothing in his mouth that could be released as a sentence, so he set both his hands at her waist and lifted her. Light. She was light, still stone, at most. He'd lifted heavier saddles. Her hands closed on Tempest's mane as she settled astride, still trying. She did not arrange her skirts, did not adjust her grip, did not reach for the reins which were dangling unattached from a snaffle that hadn't been buckled. She simply settled, still trying. All 8 stone of her weight into the small of the great black animal's back, as if she were settling onto a chair by the kitchen fire. She breathed out once, slowly, through her nose. Tempest's ears came forward. The dairymaids made a small soft sound, still trying. None of them aware of having made it. Genevieve leaned, almost imperceptibly, towards his right shoulder. The stallion turned. He walked the perimeter of the upper yard at a measured walk that any drilling sergeant would have wept to see. His great black neck arched, his ears twitching at the rhythm of her quiet body. She made a click with her tongue at the cobbles. He picked up a long-paced trot. She closed her left knee a hair tighter. He balanced. She drew the smallest breath, still trying. He halted exactly at the Duke's boots and lowered his head and breathed warm into the Duke's lapel, still trying. Genevieve slid down. Her skirt did not tear. She'd taken it up neatly under her sash before he'd even thought to look. She handed him the strand of matting she'd been holding. The way a child hands a sweet rabbit to its mother, my lord. Still trying. I beg leave to return to my duties. The first floor still wants polishing, and cook will be looking for me at past. She curtsied. She walked, exactly as straight-backed as she had walked out, towards the kitchen door. Still trying. The Duke of Ravenshire stood in the cold spring sunshine, with the breath of his unridable stallion soft on his cravat, and watched her go, and discovered that the burning sensation under his collar was not anger anymore. He could not, just at that moment, still trying, identify what it had become. Mr. Brennan found his voice first. The headgroom asked, very carefully, whether his lordship would like the stallion put up. The Duke did not answer. He set his hand on Tempest's neck instead. The stallion did not flinch, still trying. Stallion trying. In fact, leaned slightly into the touch. The way a hound leans against a knee. The Duke had owned him for 2.5 years. The stallion had never leaned into anything in his life. Still trying. Cook did not shout. Cook never shouted. Cook simply set down the wooden spoon with which she'd been beating eggs, and looked at Genevieve over the rims of her spectacles, still trying. For the precise length of time required to make a kitchen of 7 people go entirely still, she informed Genevieve, in her most measured voice, that there was a story being told in her still room, still trying, which she did not propose to repeat in front of the under-cook. There was a further story being told in the dairy, which had already reached the pantry and the laundry, and, as of 3 minutes ago, the gardener's boy, still trying. There was a third story coming up the back corridor on the legs of Mrs. Thane the housekeeper, and Mrs. Thane was not a woman she proposed to keep waiting. Genevieve stood with her hands folded over her apron, still trying. Eyes a polite half-inch above Cook's left shoulder, she replied, levelly, that his lordship had asked her to ride a horse. She had ridden the horse. She had come back to polish the first floor. Cook had buried 2 husbands and a son, and Einan had run a kitchen in every great house between Carlisle and York, looked at Genevieve for a long, quiet second. Polish the first floor, Miss Hartwell. Begin in the long gallery. Still trying. Do not under any circumstances walk past the open door of his lordship's study. She paused on the eggs. The kitchen paused with her. There will be a hot dinner waiting at 4. And Genevieve, another pause, still trying. Whoever you were before you came here is no business of mine. Polish, well, Genevieve allowed herself for the first time that morning a small private pulse of feeling somewhere behind her sternum. She inclined her head, still trying. She fetched the beeswax and the soft cloths and the long-handled brush from the still-room cupboard, and she went up the back stairs to polish the long gallery. And she did not allow her hands to tremble even when she was alone, still trying. The long gallery at Ravenshire was 140 feet long. It ran the length of the south wing, and held the family portraits in a yellowing parquet floor that smelled, when warmed by the spring sun through the tall sash windows, exactly the way childhood had smelled. Beeswax, dust, lavender from the linen press across the corridor, and the faint mineral wolfstone behind the wainscot. Genevieve knelt at the south end, set out her cloths, still trying, began at the skirting, and worked her way up. The morning light fell in long lemon-colored rectangles across the floor, broke against the ankles of the gentlemen in the portraits who watched her without comment. Some of them, she thought, still trying, would have been displeased to see a maid in this gallery polishing badly. None of them had ever met a maid in this gallery polishing well, still trying. She did not yet know that the Duke of Ravenshire was at that moment watching cross the inner court from the window of his study. That he had set down a glass of brandy he had not poured for himself. Still trying. That he had been standing at that window for the past 40 minutes, with an expression on his face that his valet had decided not to disturb. Still trying. He summoned her at 3 in the afternoon. She came in her plain gray apron freshly tied, beads of beeswax under her nails. The study was high-ceilinged and lined with horse paintings, stubs at the south wall. A Marshall Hunter over the mantel, still trying. A small unsigned watercolor above the desk that she recognized at once, and chose not to look at twice. There was a fire. There was a tea tray. There was a single chair set on her side of the great mahogany desk, which she did not sit in, still trying. Because no maid sat in the presence of her master. The Duke did not ask her to sit. He had not yet decided whether he wanted her on her feet, or... No, that second thought was a thought he had not asked permission of his own brain to have. Still trying. He let her stand in the warm silence for a long moment before he spoke. The clock on the chimney-piece marked 3:30 with a small flat strike. A coal shifted in the grate. Genevieve counted 4 breaths, still trying. In the careful, slow rhythm she had practiced 6 years ago, on the morning she had stood for the first time in front of the house steward at her first place of service, and had answered every question without permitting her face to give him anything, still trying. Adrian asked her, eventually, whose daughter she was. She answered that she was the daughter of a Yorkshire schoolmaster who had passed when she was 12. He asked after her mother, still trying. She answered that her mother had been the schoolmaster's wife and had not survived him by long. He asked where she had spent the intervening years. She answered that she had been in service, my lord. All of them. He waited. She did not elaborate. Still trying. Adrian had been in 3 parliaments, owned 11,000 acres, had sat across from a French diplomat for 90 minutes during the closing of a treaty. Still trying. He had never in his life encountered a silence as polite and as immovable as Genevieve Hartwell, standing on the other side of his desks, with her hands folded and her eyes trained at the 3rd button of his waistcoat. He observed, after a small pause, still trying, that she rode. She agreed that she did. He observed that she had ridden very well. She agreed, with a quiet courtesy that gave him nothing to push against, that her father had kept a small mare for the village, and that she had exercised her on the lanes. Still trying. Adrian set his pen down. He told her dryly that Tempest was not a small village mare. No, my lord. Her voice did not change. He is a Godolphin descendant on the dam side and a Darley on the sire. 15 hands 3/4, still trying. And he has not been gelded because your lordship has been holding him at stud. Pause. He is also currently underweight in his hind quarters. Because he is being worked at full ration on cracked corn, my lord, when he has the digestion of a thoroughbred, to be on bran mash twice a week and rolled oats only thereafter. Another pause. But I imagine your stable master is aware. The Duke set his pen down very carefully on its tray. Miss Hartwell, my lord, still trying. That is not the answer of a Yorkshire schoolmaster's daughter. It is the answer of a woman who has paid attention, my lord. It is the answer of a woman who is strict on Newmarket Heath. She did not answer, still trying. He leaned forward. Miss Hartwell, my lord, I beg you will let me return to my duties. The 3rd floor has not been done since Lady Day. You will answer me. I have answered you, my lord. I have answered every question you have asked, still trying. If your lordship would put me a different question, I will answer that one as well. Adrian leaned back in his chair. His eyes had gone the color of a sky just before rain. He had in the past 2 hours sent for the household ledger, still trying, the housekeeper's references file, his own steward, and he had read that one Genevieve Hartwell had been engaged at Ravenshire 11 months ago, on the personal recommendation of a milliner in York. The milliner had said only that the girl was honest, still trying, dexterous, and prepared to work for a half-wage with no afternoons. You will do me the courtesy of not pretending to me that you are an ordinary maid. She lifted her eyes for the first time. They were gray, the clear level gray of a winter sky over a stone wall, and they met his without flinching. I am extraordinarily a maid, my lord. I am a maid extraordinarily well. Still trying. If you find that intolerable, I will collect my character, and I will be on the carrier's cart by morning. That is not what I said. It is what your lordship's tone said. A small hot silence stood between them, across the broad polished mahogany. Still trying. The Duke did not move. Genevieve did not move. The clock on the chimney-piece ticked through 20 seconds, in which neither of them looked away. He was the first to lower his eyes to the open ledger on his desk, still trying, to a name in the 3rd column that he had been staring at for 20 minutes without absorbing. And he told her at last, in a voice carefully empty of everything, that she might return to her duties. She curtsied. she withdrew, till the door shut very softly behind her, still trying. The Duke of Ravenshire sat for a long time looking at the painting above his desk, which was a watercolor his old master had given him on the occasion of his first colt to a winning post. It was a study of a dappled gray foal with a white star, still trying. Drawn from life in a north paddock at first light, the signature in the corner was a child's looped G. Hartwell. His master had had a niece. He remembered her now. He had met her once when she had been 12 years old, still trying. Serious as in a pinafore with horsehair on the cuffs. He sat with his hand over his mouth, and the cold spring afternoon went very slowly past his window, still trying. There was a child at Ravenshire. She was Lady Beatrix Kane. 10 years old, the orphaned daughter of the Duke's late brother. She had appointed herself to Genevieve's company with news of Genevieve's arrival the previous spring, still trying. She had been deposed briefly when her cousin discovered the friendship, and ordered her governess to keep her at her French verbs in the mornings. She had been reinstated within a week, still trying, because Lady Beatrix Kane at 10 years old already had the political instinct of a duchess and the persistence of a pony with an unbarred door. She found Genevieve in the long gallery at 4:30 with the polishing cloths. "You rode Tempest," still trying. No preamble, no greeting. The way she announced most things, the second housemaid told the first housemaid, and the first housemaid told Miss Pritchett, the governess, and Miss Pritchett told the boot boy, still trying. And the boot boy informed me at 12 minutes past noon. Genevieve said quietly that she had been instructed not to speak of it. Beatrix asked by whom. Genevieve said by Cook. Beatrix waved this aside as a matter of the gravest unimportance. Cook does not signify. "I am the Duke's ward, and you are my friend, and you have done a great and historic thing, and I require to be told whether my cousin was an ass about it." Genevieve set the cloth down, still trying. She knelt on the rug and tied Beatrix's left bootless, which had been undone for some time, and had been distressing her dignity considerably. "His lordship's been a duke about it." Beatrix translated this with the unsentimental clarity of a child, still trying, which meant an ass, still trying. Genevieve was in the stables at first light. Because she could not sleep, she had lain awake in the small dim room, above the kitchens that she shared with a chambermaid named Annie, and a kitchen maid named Bess, listening to Annie's slow, regular breathing, still trying, and the ticking of the iron bedstead, and the small wet ticking of an early rain on the slate above her head. She had thought of her uncle. She had thought of her own hands. She had thought of the Duke's hands at her waist, lifting her, still trying, and of how lightly he had done it, as though her weight had not surprised him. She had thought of his eyes going dark in the courtyard, and of his eyes immediately afterwards going still. She had thought of the colt called Perseus and his fevered nostrils. Till 3, that she had given up. At 3:15, she had pulled on her dress, and her stockings, and her boots in the dark, careful not to wake Annie, and she had taken the back stairs, in her stockinged feet, and put her boots on at the bottom. It was the kind of dawn the Yorkshire dales gave grudgingly in late April, a slow blue hush over the wet hay, a cold hush in the rafters, the smell of clean straw and warm bran, and the low contented groan of a stall door working on its hinges, still trying. Somewhere in the high beams a barn owl that had not yet retired turned its great pale face and watched her come in, and decided after a private deliberation that she did not signify, still trying. Genevieve was meant to be 3 floors away polishing the morning room grate before Cook came down at 5:30. Instead, she had walked down the back stairs in her gray dress and her oldest boots, still trying, and she had let herself in through the side door of the stable block, and she had gone to Perseus's stall, because the colt that had been brewing a throat infection yesterday morning would by now be running a hard fever. He was still hearing his breathing before she saw him. The low rasping pull and the small wet click at the back of the throat that meant an inflammation had passed from the ducts into the airway proper. She did not need to put her hand to him to know, to let herself in. The colt knew her. She had been quietly leaving him a half-handful of cooked linseed every other afternoon for a month. On her way back from emptying the slop pail, still trying, he pressed his fevered nose into her shoulder and let her open his mouth, and his throat was as red as a coal, and his glands were the size of plums. She went to the medicine cupboard. It was unlocked, which she had known. She made up a steam, still trying, boiling water from the small stable forge stove, eucalyptus oil from a brown bottle, a fistful of dried thyme she had set by herself last September, and a dose of belladonna in 12 drops of brandy, still trying. Because Perseus's pulse was running thready under his jaw, she covered him with a clean blanket. set the bucket of steam under his nose, and held a sack tented over his head and her own. She was crouched there, still trying, breathing in the eucalyptus and the warm horse and the wet straw, when a man's quiet voice spoke behind her in the stall door. "Miss Hartwell," still trying. She did not jump. She finished what she was doing. She did not lift the sack until she had counted to 30, and Perseus's nostrils had stopped flaring. The Duke of Ravenshire was in his shirt sleeves. She had never seen him in his shirt sleeves, still trying. He had clearly come straight from his own bed. His hair was uncombed. His cravat was nowhere to be seen. The linen of his shirt was open at the throat and had a fold across the breast that suggested he had pulled it on without troubling his valet. Still trying. He had a glass of brandy in one hand, because he had not yet been able to face the morning sober, and a riding crop in the other, because he had been on his way to Tempest. He looked, Genevieve thought, distantly, less like a duke and more like a man. Still trying. He asked her, in a voice tightly held, what in God's name she was doing. She told him evenly that she was steaming Perseus. The colt was running a throat infection, the same one she had mentioned to the stable boy the previous morning. Still trying. He observed that she was dosing his colt with belladonna. She agreed that she was, 12 drops in a spirit base. The colt would not feel it. He was 200 guineas of thoroughbred running a dangerous fever. Still trying. And the alternative was calling out the farrier surgeon at Beverley, who was 90 minutes ride away and would charge a guinea besides. The Duke set the brandy glass down, very deliberately on the corn bin lid. Still trying. He asked her where she had learned to compound a steam from eucalyptus, brandy, and 12 drops of belladonna. She did not answer. He asked her again. The lamp on the wall guttered briefly in the cold draft from the open stable door. Still trying. Perseus's breathing under the steam had begun to ease. The Duke did not move. She straightened, set the empty bottles back into the medicine cupboard, closed the cupboard, turned to face him in the dim blue light of the stable lamp. "At Nonmarket, my lord." Her voice was quiet, level, on the heath, in the spring of the year that I was 15. From a man who had been compounding it for 40 years, still trying, and who had used the same compound on a Derby winner the year before they took his name out of the books. Pause. As you very well know, the Duke of Ravenshire put his hand against the door jamb. He breathed in once, slowly, still trying. He looked to Genevieve very much like a man who had ridden through a long night to arrive somewhere he had not expected. He said after a careful interval that Edmund Hartwell had been his master. She agreed, still trying. He said that Edmund had given him his first winner. She agreed again, and added, after a moment, that she had been there. He looked at her. She had been 12, she told him. She had poured the syllabub at the celebration dinner, still trying. He spilled some on his father's good cravat, and her uncle had laughed. Her uncle had liked him, and to Genevieve, it was the first time he had used her given name. She felt it against her sternum. "My lord, why are you scrubbing my floors?" "Because," still trying. "My lord," she said it very quietly, "the man who ruined my uncle is a friend of every great house between London and York, and I have learned that the only safe place for the niece of Edmund Hartwell is below the level at which men like him bother to look." Still trying. She paused. "I have been below that level for 6 years. I had 3 weeks left on my engagement at Ravenshire. I would have been gone, and your lordship would have remained in ignorance of me." Still trying. "And I would have been in another county before Lord Cornelius Wycliffe rode through your gates next month for the spring meeting." Another pause. "Which he is, my lord, planning to do. I read his letter to your steward by accident in February." Still trying. "When I was emptying a wastebasket." Still trying. The Duke closed his eyes. When he opened them, he had set the riding crop aside, and he had stepped fully into the stall, and he had taken her cold hand in his warm one, as if it were a thing he had been intending to do for a long time. He told her, still trying, with the simplicity of a man who had been working a sentence over for several hours and had at last hit upon its plain form, that she would not be on the carrier's cart by morning. She tried once to interrupt. He did not let her. Would not be on the carrier's cart by morning, and she would not be on the carrots by morning, and she would not be in another county by spring, and she would not be below the level at which men like Wycliffe bothered to look ever again for one further day. She tried to tell him he did not understand, still trying. He told her, with a small dry deliberation, that he understood very well, that the previous morning he had lifted his masked niece onto a stallion, for the express purpose of humiliating her in front of 7 of his servants, still trying, and that he had been awake since 2 that morning trying to compose the apology he was about to pay her. She began to say that he owed her no apology. He cut her off gently. He owed her an apology of considerable size. Perseus snuffled into his sleeve, still trying. The Duke did not move his hand from hers. He asked her, after another long pause, whether she would take charge of his stables. She refused without hesitation. She was not a man, and his stable master was, still trying. And the day he put a maid over a man in the stable yard was the day Mr. Brennan resigned his place and wrote a letter to the sporting magazine that would ruin them both. He asked then under what terms she would stay. She looked at him, still trying. She looked at the dawn light, coming pale and blue through the high stable window. She looked at her own hand, which was still in his, and which she did not particularly wish to remove, under the terms of a salaried stable assistant, my lord. Openly, still trying, not under Mr. Brennan but beside him, and answerable only to your lordship. She'd paused. £25 a year. A small room of my own off the saddle store with a key. A condition of my engagement that I am not to be required to wear an apron, still trying, or to address Mr. Brennan as sir, or to remove myself from the yard when a gentleman caller arrives. Another pause, and one further condition, my lord, on which I will not yield. Name it, still trying. That when Lord Cornelius Wycliffe arrives at your gate next month, you will not pretend you do not know who I am. He thought about it for the space of 2 breaths. Lord Wycliffe will be received by butler, escorted to the morning room, still trying, made to wait 24 minutes while his lordship finishes a letter, and then informed that the Duke of Ravenshire's stable assistant, Miss Genevieve Hartwell, niece of the late Edmund Hartwell of Newmarket, still trying, is unfortunately too busy with fooling to go into upon him. He asked, with one eyebrow lifted half a hair, whether that would suit. She did not allow her smile. She nodded, the smallest nod a woman could nod, still trying, and answered very quietly that it would suit very well, still trying. She moved her things into the small room off the saddle store at noon. The room had been a tack cleaner's berth in the previous Duke's day, 12 feet by 9, with a single high window facing east over the inner court, and a narrow iron bed, still trying, and a deal washstand, and a small cracked pier glass on the far wall. The walls were whitewashed plaster that had gone slightly cream with age. The floor was scrubbed boards. The window had been left open all morning by Mr. Brennan's youngest stable boy, still trying, who had been dispatched to air it on the Duke's particular instructions. And the room smelled of saddle soap and old leather and clean wood, and faintly of the lavender bag the boy had decided on his own initiative to set on the pillow, still trying. Genevieve had paused in the doorway, with her uncle's valise in one hand and her mother's wooden box in the other, and she had looked at the lavender bag for several seconds before she had set down her things, still trying, and walked across to the high window and leaned out briefly into the cool spring air and laughed once, very quietly, into her own sleeve. There was almost nothing to move. A canvas valise that had once been her uncle's, still trying. A wooden box with a blue ribbon worn pale that had been her mother's. A bundle of letters she had not opened in 5 years. A worn pair of riding gloves wrapped in oiled cloth. A small leather-bound notebook with the looped G, still trying. Hartwell on the inside cover, the pages closely written in pencil with diagrams of equine joints and feet proportions, and case notes on respiratory complaints in 2-year-olds, still trying. The corners of the back pages dog-eared from 6 years of consultation in the dark. By candle stub, a pair of stockings darned at the heel, a clean apron she did not, on consideration, intend ever to put on again, still trying. Lady Beatrix helped. Lady Beatrix was not very useful, but she was extremely useful at moral support, and at talking the housekeeper into letting Genevieve have a second blanket from the linen press. You look different, Hartwell, still trying. I look the same, my lady. You are not in your apron. I have been told that I do not have to be. You are wearing an emerald shawl. It belonged to my mother, my lady, still trying. Beatrix considered the small room with its narrow bed and its single window over the inner court, and its smell of saddle soap and warm leather. It is a very small room, Hartwell. It is a very fine room, my lady. It has a key. Beatrix turned, still trying. My cousin has had a box of books sent up from the library. He says he supposes you have been too long without a Stubbs, and he hopes you will accept the loan of his volumes. He had said it, Beatrix reported, to Miss Pritchett, still trying. Pritchett told the second footman had told Cook. Cook had told her. Genevieve observed dryly that he had not, by the strictest accounting, said it to anyone, and that the entire household nevertheless knew, still trying. Beatrix agreed in the satisfied tone of a child who had explained an obvious matter to a slightly slow adult. Genevieve set her uncle's valise on the foot of the bed. She set the notebook beside it, still trying. She set the leather gloves on top where she could see them. The light from the high window was the cold, clear blue of an April afternoon, and it fell across the spines of the small box of books that the Duke had carried up to her room. Stubbs, still trying. Marshall Beringer on horsemanship, an old much-thumbed copy of Bracken on equine veterinary medicine, and one volume she had not seen in 6 years. Her uncle's own, privately printed, notes on the conformation of the English thoroughbred, the spine cracked from his own thumbing, the flyleaf inscribed in his own hand to Adrian, who has the right hands. E.H. Newmarket, 1820. She sat down on the bed because her knees had stopped being reliable, still trying. Lady Beatrix climbed up beside her and took her hand. The child noticed, with the unsentimental observations of someone who had not yet learned that observations of this kind required tact, that Genevieve was crying. Genevieve said she was sitting, still trying. Beatrix corrected her with the firm logic of 10 years old. She was sitting and her eyes were wet, which was crying. Genevieve amended her position. It was, she conceded, a sort of crying, but the sort that did not require attention, still trying. The letter arrived 3 days later. Genevieve was in the lower paddock with Tempest when the Duke's valet came running, not walking. Running, which was unprecedented. Miss Harchwell, His Grace requests your immediate presence in his study, still trying. She handed Tempest's lead to the stable boy, wiped her hands on her work skirt, and followed the valet back across the yard. Adrian was standing at his desk when she entered. Not sitting, standing, still trying. With a letter in his hand and his jaw set in a way that made her think of stone. He handed her the letter without preamble. She read it. My dear Ravenshire, still trying. Word reaches me that you have developed a most progressive interest in unconventional stable arrangements. How modern of you. I look forward to our conversation at Raisby next month. Perhaps the matter merits wider discussion, still trying. The sporting magazine does so enjoy tales of aristocratic innovation. Your servant, Cornelius Wycliffe. Genevieve set the letter down on the desk very carefully. He's threatening to publish. Let him attempt it. Adrian, she caught herself. Ill Grace. If he writes that you employ me as charity, or worse, it destroys you. He's bluffing. He has no evidence of impropriety. He doesn't need evidence. He needs insinuation. And he's very good at insinuation. Adrian walked to the window, stood with his back to her, looking out at the stable yard. Then we attend Raisby, publicly. You as my stable advisor. In whatever attire you feel comfortable. On whatever terms you set, he'll ruin you. Genevieve. He turned, still trying. His eyes were the color of pewter in winter light. I watched my master die, knowing the world thought him a fraud. I will not permit his niece to live in shadows while the man who killed him walks free. He paused. Will you accompany me to Raisby? He'll trap him. She looked at this Duke who had lifted her onto a stallion to shame her, who had discovered her identity and refused to let her hide, who was willing to risk his reputation for hers. Yes, still trying. 1 week before Raisby, Genevieve opened the small trunk at the bottom of her valise. Inside, one riding habit, deep emerald green, cut high at the throat, military at the shoulder, narrow at the waist, full at the skirt, still trying. Made for her by Uncle Edmund's wife spring of 1817, when Genevieve had been 17, and had been intended, briefly, for a season in London. She had not worn it in 9 years. She held it up to the window light. The fabric still good, still trying. The color still rich, it smelled of cedar. She aired it by the window for 3 days, until the cedar gave way to the smell of green grass. She let down the hem half an inch, with stitches no governess would have praised, still trying. But no horse would have noticed. She pinned a small jet brooch at the throat. Her mother's. And she stood in front of the small square of looking-glass, nailed to the back of her wardrobe door, still trying. And she was not for a long, careful moment entirely certain who was looking back at her, still trying. The fairground at Raisby was set in a long green meadow on the south side of the village, ringed by hawthorn hedges that were just into their white mayflower, with the auction ring at the center, and a grandstand of weathered oak at the north end, still trying, and a refreshment booth, and a small brass band, and the canvas tents of half a dozen breeders stretched along the eastern hedge. The sky was the cool, clean blue of a morning that intended to behave itself, still trying. The grass underfoot was springy from the Chenitzrain masse. The air smelled of clean horses and hawthorn, and the warm sugar of the booth's cakes. There were perhaps 300 people on the ground, most of them men, still trying, most of them in dark coats and high boots, most of them carrying riding crops, as if a riding crop was an item one ordinarily required at an outdoor breakfast. There were perhaps 30 women, of whom 4 had any business with the horses, still trying, and the rest were ornamental, and Genevieve registered each of these briefly. the way a soldier registers cover before crossing a street. She walked into the courtyard at Raisby on the Duke's Arm at 10:30 on a cold, bright Friday morning in May, still trying. And the small cluster of breeders who'd been gathering by the auction ring went quiet in patches, the way grass goes quiet when a hawk crosses. She wore the emerald riding habit, the jet brooch at her throat, her hair pulled back severe, still gold in the morning sun, and she walked with her head up, and her shoulders back, and her hand light on Adrian's arm, like a woman, like who had every right to be there, still trying. Lord Cornelius Wycliffe was at the rail, 48 years old, handsome in the way predators are handsome, all sharp lines and watchful eyes, narrow, polished, exact, with very pale gray eyes and very dark hair, still trying, and the particular elegance of a man who has a great deal of money for a long time on not being mistaken for anyone else. He wore midnight blue, his cravat was edged in silver, still trying. He was holding a riding crop with one gloved hand and the price catalog with the other, and he had been laughing at something a fat squire on his left had said, when he saw the Duke walking towards him with Genevieve Hartwell on his arm. The laugh stopped, still trying. Ravenshire, Wycliffe, you have brought your stable advisor. I have. How remarkably modern of you. Adrian smiled. Small, sharp, I find modern arrangements yield superior results. Genevieve released the Duke's arm, still trying. She walked past Wycliffe without looking at him, walked along the rail of the auction ring where a colt was being shown by a heavy-set groom, still trying. With a strap arranged across the animal's withers in a manner that any honest dealer would have recognized within 12 seconds. She stopped opposite the colt, rested her gloved hands on the rail, studied him for the slow count of 4, turned her head a quarter of an inch, and said in a voice not raised, but pitched to carry exactly to the gentleman beside her. Who was the buyer, sir? You might ask the gentleman to remove the strap. The strap, miss? Across the withers, sir, still trying. Under the saddle pad, it is keeping a small swelling from your eye. It is the swelling I should examine before I bid. The buyer was a wealthy farmer from Lincolnshire by the name of Mr. Endersley, still trying. Mr. Endersley had 8,000 a year and a deep distrust of London horsemen. He looked at Genevieve. He looked at the colt. He looked at the heavy-set groom whose ears had gone pink. He turned to the auctioneer. Have the strap off, sir, if you please. Still trying. Have the strap off or I do not bid. The trap came off. The swelling, which was the size of a hen's egg, was visible to every man within 20 feet of the rail. It was the kind of swelling that in a 4-year-old indicated a developing splint, still trying, which indicated a horse that would be lame inside the year. Mr. Endersley closed his catalog. I do not bid, sir. Good morning. The colt was led away. The auction ring, which had been quietly noisy, was now quietly silent, still trying. Wycliffe caught her in the hour before the dinner bell. She had stepped away from the auction ring to find a glass of water at the small refreshment booth that had been set up by the grandstand. The Duke had gone to greet an old friend from Cambridge, still trying, and had been delayed by the fat squire who had cornered him about a broodmare. Genevieve had gone alone, which in any ordinary year of her life had been her preferred condition, and she had taken the glass of water and turned, still trying, and Lord Wycliffe had been standing 2 feet from her, with his pale eyes very level, and his gloved hand resting on the silver head of a walking cane. Miss Hartwell, sir, you have grown up. It is an unavoidable consequence, sir, of time. 6 years, still trying. 6 years, sir. You have grown up rather well. Thank you, sir, he smiled. It was the smile of a man who had practiced it. I do wonder, Miss Hartwell, what your Duke would think of certain particulars of your uncle's last year. He knows of them, sir, still trying. Does he know all of them? All that there are, sir. Are you certain? She set the glass of water down on the booth. She did not turn her body away from him. She did not look down, still trying. She had spent 6 years new cleaning grates and emptying chamber pots and sleeping in attic rooms with 3 other women. And she had used those 6 years for several useful purposes, still trying, of which one had been the slow, patient, meditative practice of not allowing her face to register anything in the presence of men like Lord Wycliffe. Sir, your concern for my uncle's posthumous reputation is touching. It is also 6 years overdue, still trying. If your lordship has anything material to add the public record on the events at Tattersall's, the spring of 1820, I suggest you write a letter to the sporting magazine, as you so successfully did before. Miss Hartwell, sir, still trying. You finished me with a sentence 6 years ago. I have, since then, become quite difficult to finish, Miss Hartwell. It was the Duke. He had stepped between them quietly, the way a horseman steps, between two animals who are working themselves up to bite. He was not raising his voice. He was not, in fact, even looking at Wycliffe. He was looking at Genevieve, Miss Hartwell. I've come to see whether you have eaten. I have not, my lord. I thought as much. Wycliffe, if you wilt excuse us, Ravensbush, words, sir, in private. By the south paddock. As I said, a small brittle silence. Then Wycliffe bowed, the smallest correct bow of a man who had been cornered in his own preferred clearing, and stepped back, still trying. The Duke did not move until Wycliffe had walked out of earshot. He turned. He took Genevieve's gloved hand. He lifted it briefly to his lips, in front of the small interested crowd around the refreshment booth, and pressed a kiss against her knuckles. The small interested crowd became a small enthralled crowd. And Genevieve Hartwell felt for the first time in 6 years that she was not alone with what she had been carrying, still trying. The Duke held out his arm. Miss Hartwell, my lord, will you walk back to the inn with me? Through the meadow, the long way. She put her hand through his arm. They walked through the long meadow that lay between the fairground and the inn, still trying, which was a quarter of an hour by the cart road, and a half by the field path, and there was no one in it but a thrush in a hawthorn, and a pair of brown cattle, and the slanted yellow light of an English May afternoon, still trying. Genevieve did not speak for the first half of the walk. The Duke did not press her. At the kissing gate that opened onto the meadow proper, she stopped. She told him quietly, with one gloved hand on the wooden gate bar, that she had been quite calm all morning, still trying, and that she found now that she was about to stop being calm. He told her without hurry that this was permissible. She said she would rather not be observed. He looked deliberately at the field, still trying, which the Monsignors were observing but a thrush in the white-flowered hawthorn, and informed her with the same steady gentleness with which one might inform a horse that there was no need to shy at a passing leaf, still trying, that the thrush had poor opinions of all of them, and that its discretion could be relied upon. She laughed. It was the smallest laugh, and it was wet at the edges. It was the first uncomplicated laugh she had laughed in his presence, still trying, and it broke the surface of her face open like a stone, dropped into a still pond. She put her hand over her mouth. She turned her face away from him. The Duke set his hand on the small of her back, very gently, and did not move it. Genevieve, my lord, still trying. I shall be all right in a moment. Take what time you need, she wept. Not for very long, not loudly, just the slow, steady weeping of a woman who had been holding a thing for 6 years, and had set it down at last, still trying. And on setting it down, that she had not been aware of how much it had weighed. The Duke did not speak. He did not pull her into his arms. He did not produce a handkerchief at her. He did not recite her any speeches, still trying. Back, kissing gait, with his hand on the small of her back. And he kept his hand there for the precise duration of her weeping. And not 1 second past it. When she stopped, she stood very still. My lord, Genevieve, still trying. I should like you to understand something. Yes, I am not crying because of Wycliffe. No, I am crying because for 6 years I have been doing this without anyone behind me. And I had got rather used to it, still trying. And what I am finding this afternoon is that I am not as accustomed to it as I had supposed. Genevieve, my lord. He turned her very gently to face him, Miss Hartwell. Genevieve, I want you to come home with me, my lord. Not as a servant, not as a project, not as a matter on which my conscience requires repair. Although it does, he took both her hands. I would like you to come home with me as Genevieve, as yourself, as my master's niece, still trying, and as the woman who rode my unrideable staff first request, and as the woman who has just told Lord Wycliffe that he is 6 years overdue, still trying, and as the woman whom I have not stopped looking at since the morning she laid the strand of mane in my hand and walked back to the kitchens. Silence. I am 30 seconds, Miss Hartwell, from kissing you in this meadow. If you have any objection, still trying. This is the moment to raise it. She raised her face. The gray eyes met the pewter eyes. She thought briefly of her Uncle Edmund, and of the wide blue April morning in the upper yard, and of the first laugh she had laughed in 6 years, and she said, My lord, still trying. I have no objection whatsoever. He kissed her at the kissing gate in a meadow in May with the thrush watched from the hawthorn. It was the kind of kiss that in stories you would not need described. It's a kiss restrained, charged, careful, and complete, still trying. The kind a man gives a woman when he's been quite certain about her for several weeks, and has that morning defended her reputation to a man who'd attempted to destroy it, and arrived punctual at the next thing. She set her gloved hands on his lapels, still trying. He set his on the small of her back, where he had been keeping them anyway. When he stopped, she said, "My lord," he said. Adrian, he said. "Genevieve, will you marry me?" She said, "Not in this meadow." "Where then?" "At Ravenshire." "Still trying, my lord Adrian, in the chapel. When the foaling is done and Perseus has won at York and my uncle's name is back in the magazine, and on certain conditions, name them." "Still trying." "That I shall publish a treatise in my own name, on the training of 2-year-olds, before the year is out. Yes, that I shall keep my room off the saddle store, and a key to it." "Still trying." "And that I shall be at liberty to retreat there for a half-hour any afternoon I please without explanation. Yes, that my uncle's name shall be inscribed in the family chapel alongside your own father's. Yes, I shall be addressed by Mr. Brennan and by every man in the stables as Miss Hartwell, or Mrs. Blackmore, or your grace as the case may be. But never in any combination as Sir Genevieve. And that, my lord Adrian, still trying. For at least the first year of our marriage I shall be permitted to muck out a stall when I'm cross with you." As an alternative to throwing things, the Duke of Ravenshire, who was holding her by the small of her back in a meadow in May, still trying, with a kissing gate at his elbow and a horse fair in the distance, and the rest of his life ahead of him, began to laugh. He laughed for a long time. He laughed until he had to set his forehead briefly against her shoulder. "Genevieve Hartwell, yes, still trying. My lord, I love you. I know, my lord. You will say it back in your own time. In my own time, my lord. And in the meantime?" "In the meantime, my lord, you will buy me a small dinner at the inn, because I have not yet eaten." She laughed. She turned, still trying. They walked, still trying. It was 2 months after Raisby, 2 months after the kissing gate. The sporting magazine had just published its counter-statement. Front page buttype, Edmund Hartwell. A name restored, signed by the Duke of Ravenshire, Lord Ashbury, still trying. And the Marquess of Bourne. It detailed the fraud, the witnesses, the veterinary surgeon's testimony that the horse had been lame before Edmund Hartwell purchased it. It did not mince words. It did not apologize. It ended, still trying. Edmund Hartwell was among the greatest horsemen of his generation. His name deserves to be remembered with honor. We call upon the racing community to acknowledge the injustice done to him and to restore his legacy. Within a week, still trying. 3 major stables had offered public apologies for having believed the original accusations. 2 breeders, who had worked with Edmund, came forward with their own stories of Wycliffe's fraud. Still trying. The racing world, which had been so quick to condemn Edmund Hartwell, was now equally quick to condemn Cornelius Wycliffe. And Wycliffe, who had built his entire reputation on the appearance of honesty, watched it crumble in a matter of days. Still trying. He came to Ravenshire at midnight, drunk, banging on the door. The household woke. Adrian went down in his shirt sleeves. Genevieve followed despite his protests. Wycliffe stood at the entrance hall, swaying slightly, his cravat undone, his coat stained, still trying. His eyes wild. "You've ruined me, Ravenshire." Adrian's voice was cold, controlled. "You ruined yourself. I'll tell everyone about her." "About what she? What I what?" Genevieve stepped forward, into the lamplight, for the first time in 6 years, still trying. Dietrichly, direct the man who had destroyed her uncle, who had tried to destroy her, who had made her believe that the only safe place in the world was invisible. "What exactly will you tell them, Lord Wycliffe? That I refused your offer of employment? That I chose scrubbing floors over your attentions? Please, do share." Wycliffe's face twisted. "You were nothing. A schoolmaster's niece. You had no prospects. I had dignity." Her voice was quiet, level, still trying. "Which is considerably more than you will possess when I am finished." She walked closer, until she was standing 3 feet from him. "You see, my lord, I spent 6 years learning something valuable. There are worse things than poverty, than obscurity. Still trying. There is being you. A man so uncertain of his own judgment that he had to destroy a better man to feel adequate." Pause. "You did not ruin Uncle Edmund because he wronged you. You ruined him because he was superior to you, and everyone knew it." Still trying. Wycliffe lunged. Adrian stepped between them fast, caught Wycliffe by the collar. "You are leaving now, and if you ever speak her name again, we will settle this at dawn. Do you understand me?" Wycliffe stared at him, at Adrian, still trying, at this duke who had once been his friend, who had once drunk with him and hunted with him and laughed at his jokes, and saw nothing there but cold fury. He stumbled back, turned, left. They never saw him again. Still trying. Perseus's race at York was scheduled for mid-July. The St. Leger Stakes, 2-year-old division. Genevieve could not ride. Women were not permitted. But she had trained him every morning for 8 weeks, with Mr. Brennan consulting on strategy. Still trying. And Lady Beatrix keeping time with a pocket watch she had borrowed from the butler, and Adrian watching from the fence. not offering advice, just watching, the way he had been watching her for months now, still trying, with something in his eyes that made her feel seen, truly seen, for the first time in longer than she could remember. The day of the race, they took the carriage to York. Genevieve wore the emerald riding habit, the jet brooch at her throat, still trying, her hair pulled back in a way that was almost severe, but not quite. Adrian wore dark gray, his cravat cream, his expression carefully neutral, but she could see the tension in the set of his shoulders. Nervous? Terrified, she laughed. He'll win, still trying. You sound very certain I am. The York racecourse was a sea of people, gentry and common folk alike, all come to watch the horses run, to place their bets, to drink and shout and lose themselves for an afternoon in the thrill of speed and chance. Still trying. Genevieve and Adrian made their way to the owner's box. Lord Ashbury was already there, the Marquess of Bourne, Sir Edmund Chase. All three men stood when Genevieve entered, which was unprecedented, and which made her throat tight. Miss Hartwell, still trying. My lords, Sir Edmund, we are honored to make your acquaintance. The honor is mine. They sat. The horses were brought to the starting line, Perseus among them, a beautiful bay with a white star, still trying, just like the foal in the watercolor above Adrian's desk, the one Genevieve had drawn when she was 12, when the world had been simple, and her uncle had been alive, and she had believed that goodness and skill were enough. The starting gun fired, still trying. The horses burst forward. Perseus started slow, too slow. Genevieve's heart climbed into her throat. Her hands gripped the rail. Adrian's hand found the small of her back, steady and coring. At the half-mile mark, Perseus found his stride. Long, still triumph. Clean. He passed 2 horses, then 3. The crowd began to roar. Genevieve couldn't breathe. Final furlong, Perseus was neck and neck with the favorite, a chestnut from Lord Pemberton's stable, stride for stride, matched even, and then, still trying. Perseus pulled ahead, half a length. Across the finish line first. Genevieve's hands flew to her mouth. Adrian lifted her off her feet, spun her once, set her down. Your uncle would be so proud. She couldn't speak, could only nod. Still trying. Because if she tried to speak she would cry, and she had cried enough in meadows and stables. Today was for joy. Still trying. That evening, after the celebrations, after the toasts and the congratulations, and the endless stream of well-wishers, Adrian took Genevieve to the chapel at Ravenshire. Small stone, ancient, family names carved on the walls. Still trying. Generations of Blackmores, the stonecutter had come that afternoon, had carved a new name, beside Adrian's father's, Edmund Hartwell, Master of Horses, Hull 1770-1820. He had the right hands. Genevieve stood before it, traced the letters with her fingers. The stone was still rough, fresh. Real Adrian stood behind her, close enough that she could feel his warmth. It's done. Yes, are you ready for the next thing? She turned. The next thing? He smiled, pulled a small box from his pocket, opened it. Inside a ring, gold band. Single emerald, the exact green of her riding habit, of her mother's shawl, of the life she had thought she'd lost. Genevieve Hartwell. Will you marry me? Properly now. Still trying. With a ring and witnesses and all the things I should have offered you in that meadow. She looked at the ring, at Adrian, at the name on the wall, at this man who had fought for her uncle's honor. Still trying. Who had stood beside her at horse fairs and kissing gates, who had given her back her name and her work and herself. Yes, still timber. The wedding, Ravenshire Chapel in the morning, bells ringing clear across the estate. The household gathered, servants and grooms and tent farmers. Mr. Brennan in his best coat, Mrs. Brennan, wiping her eyes, still trying. Cook doing the same and pretending she wasn't. Lady Beatrix as flower girl, taking her duties with the utmost seriousness, scattering petals with the precision of a military campaign. Genevieve walked down the aisle alone, no one to give her away. Still trying. She didn't need anyone. The emerald riding habit had been altered into a wedding dress, still green, still military at the shoulders, the jet brooch at her throat. Her hair pinned back with her mother's combs. Adrian stood at the altar, held her eyes fixed on her, only her, as if she were the only thing in the world worth looking at. The vicar spoke. Genevieve barely heard. She was looking at Adrian, at this man who had lifted her onto a stallion, to humble her, still trying, who had been humbled himself, who had fought for her, stood beside her, loved her. Do you, Genevieve Hartwell, take this man? I do. Do you, Adrian Blackmore? I do. Then by the power vested in me, you may. He was already kissing her, still trying. The chapel erupted in as Beatrix threw more petals. Mrs. Brennan cried openly now, and Genevieve thought this is what it feels like to come home. The wedding breakfast was held in the great hall. Long tables, food and wine and toasts. So many toasts Lord Ashbury stood, to the Duke and Duchess of Ravenshire, and to Edmund Hartwell, whose legacy lives on in his extraordinary niece. Everyone drank. Mr. Brennan stood, cleared his throat, looked uncomfortable, but determined, still trying. 40 years ago, Edmund Hartwell taught me everything I know about horses, took me on when I was just a lad who didn't know a fetlock from a forelock, gave me a trade, a life. He paused. I kept my mouth shut when Wycliffe destroyed him, as I had a family to feed. I'm not proud of it. Another pause. But today, his niece teaches me something new every morning. About horses, about honor, about what it means to stand up when standing is hard. He raised his glass to the Duchess. Genevieve's eyes filled. She stood, raised her own glass to my Uncle Edmund, who taught me that horses do not care about your title, only your hands. That afternoon, after the breakfast, after the guests had begun to drift away, Genevieve changed out of the wedding dress into her work clothes. Boots, breeches, Sybil shirt. Adrian found her in Tempest's stall on our wedding day. You knew what you were marrying, he laughed, leaned against the stall door, still trying, watched her plait Tempest's mane the way he had watched her 100 times before, and would watch her 1,000 times more. Genevieve, Adrian, I love you. She didn't look up. Kept plaiting. Then softly, I love you too. He went very still. Say it again. She looked up, met his eyes, smiled. I love you, Adrian Blackmore. You are still deeply foolish for lifting me onto the stallion in front of 7 people. But I love you. I know I'm foolish. You may consider yourself humbled. Still trying. In perpetuity, he crossed to her, took her face in his hands. I will take it, kissed her. Tempest crunched a carrot that Beatrix had smuggled in. The dappled foal in the paddock came to the half-door, nudged Genevieve's sleeve. And Genevieve, still trying, who had been a maid 11 months ago, who had been a kitchen servant for 6 years before that, who had been a girl who drew watercolors and poured syllabub and believed in goodness, who was now the Duchess of Ravenshire, still trying, set her hand against Tempest's warm-nosed, looked at her Duke. Her Duke looked back, and somewhere in the Dovecote, a thrush sang 4 clear notes into the afternoon. 1 year later, autumn, Genevieve's treatise was published, still trying, on the training and temperament of the English thoroughbred, Observations from the Field, by Genevieve Blackmore, Duchess of Ravenshire, the first woman to publish in the field, the first aristocrat to write under their own working experience, still trying. The book sold out in 3 weeks, second printing ordered, third printing after that, and then the letters began to arrive. From women. Young women and old women, women who had been told their entire lives that horses were not for them, still trying, that the stable yard was not for them, that knowledge and skill and expertise were not for them. Women who had questions, who wanted to learn, who wanted to know if it was true, that the Duchess of Ravenshire would teach them, still trying. Genevieve read the letters in her small room off the saddle store, the room she had kept, with its key, and its narrow bed, and its smell of leather and lavender. She showed them to Adrian that evening. They want lessons. Then give them lessons. Still trying. I am not a school, you could be. She looked at him. You are serious. Entirely. We have the stables, the horses. Why not share it? Because it is unprecedented good. I have always preferred precedent setting to precedent following. So Genevieve started a school. Small, only 6 students at a time. She taught them what Uncle Edmund had taught her, how to read a horse, how to listen, how to earn trust instead of demanding it, still trying, how to sit a trot and manage a canter and gentle a fractious animal with patience instead of force. Lady Beatrix was her first student at 11, already showing Edmund Hartwell's gift, the quiet hands, the steady seat, still trying. The instinct for what a horse needed before it knew itself. The second student was the daughter of country Vic. The third was the granddaughter of a baronet who had disapproved until his granddaughter won her first ribbon, still trying. The fourth was a widow from York. The fifth and sixth were sisters from a family in Leeds, all of them different, all of them determined, all of them learning, and Genevieve stood in the stable yard one October morning, still trying, watching Beatrix teach the vicar's daughter how to hold the reins. And she felt Adrian's hand on the small of her back. You have built something remarkable. We have built something remarkable. No, this is yours. I merely provided the stable. Leaned into him. It is ours, all of it. The stable, the school, the life. Mr. Brennan approached slowly, as if not wanting to interrupt. Your Grace, Mr. Brennan, she is something. Your Duchess. Adrian smiled. Indeed she is. Still trying. Your master would be proud, indeed he would. Mr. Brennan took off his cap, held it against his chest, looked at Genevieve teaching in the autumn sunlight, and said very softly, "Aye, there she is that evening, after the students had gone, still trying, after the horses had been fed and watered and settled for the night, after Beatrix had been sent to bed, protesting that she was not tired, even though she clearly was." Genevieve and Adrian walked through the upper yard, still trying. Past the place where he had lifted her onto Tempest, past the kitchen door where she had walked away, past all the places where they had been, before they knew what they were becoming. Tempest stood in his paddock, still trying. The great black stallion who had refused every rider, until her. He came to the fence when he saw them, cleaved his nose into Genevieve's hand, gentle now, trusting. A small brown foal stood beside him, Tempest's first born in the spring, still trying. All legs and curiosity. What will you name him? Genevieve considered. Edmund Adrian nodded. Perfect. They stood there as the light faded, and the first stars came out, and the evening settled soft and blue over the dales, still trying. And Genevieve thought of her uncle, who had believed in her when the world did not, and she thought of the girl she had been, 12 years old with horsehair on her cuffs, pouring syllabub at a celebration. Still trying, drawing watercolors of foals in North paddocks, believing that skill and goodness were enough, and she thought of the woman she had become, who had learned that sometimes they were not enough, that sometimes you had to fight, had to stand, had to refuse to be invisible, even when invisibility was safer. And she thought of the women who would come after her, the students, the readers, the ones who would see what she had done and believe that they could do it too, still trying, that they could take the things the world said were not for them, and claim them anyway, with quiet hands and steady hearts, efforts and the absolute refusal to be diminished. Adrian's hand found hers. What are you thinking? She smiled, still trying. That I am exactly where I am supposed to be. And where is that? Home. And in the high beams of the stable, a thrush sang, 4 clear notes, the same song it had sung in a meadow in May, when a duke had kissed a maid at a kissing gate, still trying, and promised her the world, and kept his word.